Have you ever wondered if the rise and fall of great powers follows some kind of predictable script? Well, according to the source material we're digging into today, it absolutely does. We're about to break down a pattern that for the last 500 years seems to have foretold the collapse of one empire after another. The source kicks things off with this really powerful metaphor. Picture it, an aging empire, just like an old champion, often picks a fight to prove it's still got it. They flex their muscles one last time, even as the real strength is fading away. And that really gets to the core idea here. The argument is that this isn't just random chance. It's a recurring cycle, a script that is played out time and time again, taking down the world's most dominant powers. This pattern has a name: the cycle of destruction. And here's the key. It's not about losing a single big war. The source says the trouble starts from within. We're talking internal rots and just complete economic exhaustion. A superpower literally spends itself into oblivion. So what's the evidence for a claim that big? Well, the source gives us three crystal clear case studies from the last 5 centuries: the Spanish Empire, the British Empire, and the Soviet Union. And the claim is that each one, despite all their differences, followed the exact same 7-stage path to ruin. Now, take a look at this timeline. This is where it gets really fascinating. Spain's decline? It took about 80 years. Britain's took half that, around 40. But the Soviet Union? Get this. It went from superpower to non-existent in just 900 days. The cycle isn't just repeating, it's getting faster. Okay, let's start with Spain. Back in the 1500s, they had all the gold and silver in the world, but they spent it all on constant wars. To pay their bills, they started debasing their currency, mixing cheap copper into pure silver coins, until they were worthless. They went bankrupt 4 times in 40 years, stopped making their own stuff, and watched their smartest people leave the country. Sound familiar at all? Next up, the British Empire. And it's like we're watching the same movie. Their huge empire was incredibly expensive. World War I completely bankrupted them, forcing them off the gold standard and tanking their currency. They went from being the world's banker to being deeply in debt to America. The result? The empire crumbled, and the pound lost its global dominance. And now for the most recent example, the USSR. They spent a staggering 20% of their entire economy on the military, just to keep up with the US. Their state-run economies stalled, innovation died, and they became totally dependent on oil money. When oil prices crashed, the cash ran out, and the whole empire collapsed almost overnight. Not because of a war, but because it went broke. So 3 empires, 1 pattern. And this brings us to the big central question of the source material. If this cycle is so predictable, where does the world's current superpower, the United States, stand today? According to this analysis, the United States isn't just starting the cycle, it's already 5 stages deep. Let's break down exactly how. Okay, so here's the crucial point. The source argues that the US is right now experiencing all 5 of the initial stages that led to the downfall of Spain, Britain, and the USSR. Only the final 2 stages, losing the dollar's world reserve status and then total collapse, are still waiting in the wings. Let's break down the evidence they present. Stage 1, military overexpansion. This number pretty much says it all. Over 750 US military bases in more than 80 countries. The source argues this is the classic footprint of an overextended empire, just like all the ones that came before it. Stage 2 is currency devaluation. Since the US went off the gold standard back in 1971, the dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power. The source basically says printing trillions of dollars is the modern version of Spain mixing copper into its silver coins. Different methods, same result. And then there's stage 3, the debt cycle. That number is just staggering. $38 trillion and climbing. The US is now borrowing new money just to pay the interest on its old debt. That is the very definition of a debt spiral, one that Spain, Britain, and the Soviets all got trapped in. Stage 4, productive loss. The source points out a massive shift. The US used to be the world's workshop, right? It made things. Now, it primarily designs, finances, and consumes things that are made somewhere else. That reliance on imports, paid for it with a currency that's losing value, it's a direct parallel to Spain's fatal dependency on foreign goods. And stage 5, social decay. The source lists a bunch of indicators: record low trust in institutions, rising social problems, and extreme political division. The argument is, these aren't just isolated political issues. They're symptoms of a society starting to crack under huge economic and imperial stress. So if the US is already 5 stages in, what comes next? Well, the source predicts two final, pretty devastating stages.
Stage 6 is losing its reserve currency status, which is seen as the beginning of the end. The source points to what it calls early warning signs: BRICS nations working on a dollar alternative, central banks around the world buying up physical gold, and major oil trades happening in other currencies. That's a direct challenge to the petrodollar system that has propped up the dollar's power for decades.
And finally, stage 7, collapse. The source makes a chilling prediction here. It says this won't be a slow, graceful decline. It argues that when a reserve currency fails and the debt becomes totally unpayable, the fall is rapid and it is brutal, just like it was for the Soviet Union. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? The source presents this not as an opinion, but as a recurring historical pattern, almost like a law of gravity for superpowers. And that leads to this stark conclusion from the source material. It's not a question of if, but when. The path is laid out, the steps are clear, and according to this analysis, the final outcome is pretty much inevitable. And that leaves us with a final thought. This whole breakdown has focused on past empires and the US today, but the source suggests this is a universal framework. So take a look at these factors: military spending, debt, social cohesion. If you apply this cycle as a lens, where does your own country stand?